Welcome to day 7 of the 2022 challenge by the Sociology guy. In this challenge, what I do is I set 20 marks of questions for the AQA A level sociology specification for students who are sitting exams in June 2022. The questions I set are all based upon information that has not been disclosed by AQA in their advanced information. So this is the stuff that students need to definitely revise. This week we've been looking at theory and methods. There were 2 questions today. First of all, outline and explain 2 practical limitations of using observations in sociological research. And question 2, outline and explain 2 reasons why sociological research cannot be value free. Now, the first question, there has been a trend recently for AQA to talk about practical, ethical or theoretical limitations of using a certain method. And there's also been a bit of a trend for them to go a little bit broader. So they've talked about theoretical limitations of using experiments, for example, or ethical experiments for using secondary sources. So what I've done here is I've taken one of the most commonly asked methods, which is observations, and I've looked for 2 practical limitations of using observations. And of course, observations that can be covert or overt observations, participant or non-participant observations, and we're looking for practical limitations. So this is things like the time it takes, the access to resources, access to participants, the funding, personal characteristics of the researcher, those type of things, the logistics of conducting a piece of research. Second question is outline and explain 2 reasons why sociological research cannot be value free. It's one of those questions that could come up as a 20 marker, not this year but in future. The idea about sort of like whether sociology can or cannot be value free. We're looking at the side where that says it can't be value free. Some theorists will suggest yes, it can be value free. So, for example, the works of like Weber and Durkheim and all of those who talk about sort of like the idea that sociology can be value free. We're looking at researchers who suggest that it cannot be value free. So today I sent out this, which looked at covert participant observations. I think this is quite a useful recap, sort of like on different types of observations, but specifically covert participant observations. Some of the issues that you will have with covert participant observations are things like maintaining a cover, establishing a cover, gaining access to participants, and being able to conduct the research without being detected. So there's lots of different practical limitations that you can have with the covert participant observations. And if I was answering that question on an exam, I think I would go with covert participant observations. It does lend itself to lots of different practical issues that you can talk about. So let's look at my response. One practical limitation of using observations in sociological research is gaining access to a sample. So this is a practical limitation, gaining access to participants, access to a sample. As observations are an intrusive method of research requiring the researchers to observe participants over long periods of time, participants may be reluctant to volunteer to be observed. So I've developed this point a little bit, but there's more I can do to show my deeper understanding of observations and some of the problems, particularly practical problems you may have in conducting one. Furthermore, if the researcher chooses to use a covert participant observation, they will need to gain access through developing a cover, which can be time consuming and difficult to achieve and may require modifications to the researcher's appearance, attitude and personality. For example, when researching Chelsea football hooligans, McIntyre had to get tattooed to demonstrate his commitment to the firm. Furthermore, Griffin used sun lamps and took tannin pills in order to modify his appearance when conducting observations in the impacts of racism. Okay, so what I've done is I've used 2 examples, and this is a good thing to do when you're talking about methods, is use an example that proves the point that you're making. So this one is gaining access to a sample, what you might have to do to gain access to the sample, and we're talking about modifications here, modifications to appearance or attitude or personality. Now at the end here I have put a slight evaluation. Okay, now we've mentioned before in the 10 mark outline and explain you do not need to evaluate. I put the evaluation in as part of my analysis, and also because it's worth getting into the habit of evaluating everything you write. There's lots of different types of questions on sociology. You're never going to get marked down for making an evaluation of it, so it's a good habit to get into because it really helps you with the 20 and 30 mark essays to consistently evaluate the points that you're making. However, one way to overcome this is through using a snowball sample, gaining access to one individual who could introduce the researcher to others. My second paragraph, a second practical limitation of using observations in sociological research is maintaining a cover. This is the case when using covert observations. So I've gone with covert observations again, but the question is asking about observations, so I'm well within my rights to use the same type of observation twice. As those being researched are unaware they are being observed, the researcher must maintain their cover at all times. This means they're unable to overtly record conversations or take notes, and means they must rely upon memory when documenting their observation. Furthermore, if the research were to be discovered, it could negatively impact on their research and in some instances cause them harm. Now, some people may think I'm going into an ethical limitation here, but what I'm just doing is I'm using it and showing how these are interlinked, which is a form of analysis. For example, Patrick, when researching gangs in Glasgow, was almost uncovered when he tried to pay for a suit with cash rather than through credit. This could have exposed him as being more affluent than those he was observing and had the potential to end his research. So what I've done is I've developed the point. I've said maintaining the cover. I've given an example of how I maintain the cover and why it is important to maintain that cover. Our second question, we looked at values. Okay, so how values can influence sociological research, and I sent this out on the screen with a few ideas here. So the first one, a sociologist's theoretical perspective may influence how they view a particular topic. So Marxists will take very much a class-based position on different topics. Feminists will focus on gender inequality. Funding bodies may influence the researcher by dictating the method they use and what they expect the researcher to find. A sociologist's career trajectory may influence the research, particularly if they're looking to establish themselves in a certain field of sociology. And the social responsibility of researchers. Some researchers, particularly those on the interpretivist side, see sociology as a force for giving a voice to people, and therefore they're going to be less objective. They're going to be value laden as opposed to value free. And Gouldner talks about this idea, particularly when he suggests that those who try to use objective methods are basically selling out. There are a number of other issues you could have talked about. The choice of methodology, how some sociologists will prefer to use interpretivist methodology, and therefore they will be looking for subjective interpretations, which means that they are putting their values onto what the participants are saying. Their view of science, do they want to view sociology scientifically? What are the aims of the research? Links a little bit to funding bodies, but what are they looking to prove? Their interpretation of data, so their subjective interpretations of the information that is given. Different cultural backgrounds of researchers as well can have an influence, particularly if you're investigating a culture that you are not native to. But let's look at my response here. First response, one reason why sociological research cannot be value free is due to researchers' theoretical perspectives. So I've picked up on that point. Use an example here. Sociologists will be influenced by their view of society. For example, Marxists will focus on class inequalities. Feminists will focus on gender inequalities. This has the potential to impose the researcher's values onto any interpretation of data and means that the research could be value laden. So the idea would be is that Marxists are always looking to prove that the working class are oppressed by the ruling class. Feminists are always looking to prove that there is a disparity between the rights that women have, or the experiences that women have, and the experiences that men have. This is particularly the case when considering the researcher's view of the responsibility of sociology as a force for change in society. So we are kind of making this link between 2 points here, rather than as an empirical study. For example, Becker argued that the purpose of sociology was to be on the side of the underdog in society and represent the views of those less likely to be heard. One of his most seminal texts was called The Outsiders. As a result, his values could interfere with the conduct of his research, displaying empathy for his research subjects and looking for external reasons for behaviours that were observed rather than looking at social facts. So the idea is that Becker, or the sociologist who's conducting this piece of research, their values impact on the research because they start looking for things that prove their point. Second explanation for why sociology cannot be value free is down to the demands of funding bodies. Okay, so there's my second point. Explain a little bit about funding bodies here. Sociologists fund their research based upon applications to funding bodies such as charities, trusts, universities and the government. As a result, funding bodies have a large say in both the choice of topic the researcher investigates and the methods they use in order to conduct that research. For example, charities such as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation examine the impacts of poverty in the UK, and so these values will be present in research that is conducted on their behalf. Again, it's linking into this idea of values. We've talked about the researcher's values, but also the funding body's values. Some people will argue that if the values of the researcher and the funding body don't match up, it will actually make the research more objective. However, we know that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is going to look for poverty, so that might influence the findings of the researcher if they are looking to prove the Rowntree's Foundation point. Of course, I'm not saying the Rowntree Foundation isn't objective. I'm just using that as an example. Furthermore, funding from governments tends to be based upon the use of large-scale quantitative data, in part due to the need for policies that result from the research to appeal to large sections of the electorate. As a result, conclusions may be drawn by researchers that support the creation of policies that would be ideologically favourable to the government. So even in our analysis of data, we may be influenced externally by external forces, particularly if it's government funded. Gouldner argues that funding bodies are one of the largest influences in the conduct of sociological research, and as such, their values will be represented in all stages of the conduct of research, in choosing the topic, in choosing the method, and in the interpretation of the results. So that's our second question completed. Let's look at tomorrow's questions for day 8. We've now done we've now got 106 questions to go. We've done 21 questions so far. This is questions 22 and 23. Outline and explain 2 reasons why interpretivist methods are better suited to study in society today. Bit of a tricky question, and what you've got to do is you've got to apply your understanding of interpretivism and how they like to conduct small-scale research that is very rich in Verstehen, that has got lots of validity. Why is that better suited to studying today? Might bring a little bit of social action theory in here as well. Question 2, outline and explain 2 ways sociology can be seen to be scientific. It's one of those debates that comes up, or people look to revise every year. That lots of people think it's probably the hardest debate. I actually think it's probably more straightforward. Can sociology be a science? We're looking for 2 points that will suggest that sociology can be scientific. And you might want to look at perspectives. You may want to look at realism, and you might want to look at positivist viewpoints. For this one, to sort of like suggest that how sociology can be scientific. Well, that concludes day 7 of the 2022 challenge. Hopefully you'll join me for day 8, where I will go through my answers to the 2 questions that are on the screen. Thanks for watching.